Zelensky has no prospect politically as soon as this war ends. It's been a money-making corruption machine in addition to all the other issues. The puzzle for many of us is why the Germans, the French, the British, and by that I don't mean the publics, I mean the small leadership group, are so insistent on fighting a losing battle, which has cost at least 2 million Ukrainian casualties. It's been a disaster. Why they're so interested in continuing that battle. I would say a couple of things about that. One is that their publics are not with them. So Merz, Starmer, and Macron are among the least popular politicians in the whole world. They have no public backing in their own country. Their own countries do not want World War III. They do not want war with Russia. They'd actually like pensions, Social Security, continued decent living standards. They don't want this militarization. So this is not a popular cause in Europe. It is a cause of Merz, Starmer, Macron, and a small group that they represent. Now, what is that cause? I would say most people that look at this closely don't have a good answer, convincing answer to that. Is it that their own political futures are wrapped up in a failed project, and so they can't admit wrong? Is it that they're pawns of the military-industrial complex, both their own and the United States? Is it when I look at Merz and listen to him, I feel almost like it's a German wanting revenge on Russia for World War II. That may sound a little harsh, but Merz is vulgar. He's a warmonger. He hasn't said one thing about peace since he became chancellor, and his support in Germany is collapsing. So I'm hardly alone in saying that. I'm aligned with the vast majority of the German people, actually, in saying that. So all of this is to say, Glenn, that we're not in a new issue. We're in an issue that's been going on 30 years. During the second Trump term, Trump has repeatedly said, let's stop this war for the reasons I've been saying. Then the Europeans and Zelensky have run in, and Trump has changed his tune, reflecting not only his personal mood swings and high volatility, but also the fact that the U.S. security state is divided. There is the military-industrial complex in the U.S., which is happy to fight on. They're making lots of money. This is a very profitable war for the military contractors, for the senators and congressmen that support the military contractors. So when you ask, is this the end? Logically, it should be, but Trump has backed down each time that he's said to the Russian counterparts, let's end this on the basis of Ukrainian neutrality. And whether he'll back down again is the question. I'm hoping the war will end to save Ukraine from this terrible, mistaken, futile, seemingly perpetual war that has been waged now for well over a decade, and this project that has been waged for 30 years.
Well, the post-Cold War objective of NATO appears to have been to develop a collective hegemony in Europe, that is, to push Russia out of the continent, again, fitting within the unipolar moment. But some of the split you refer to within the US, it seems to be that there's a new wing of American politicians who think that the hegemonic aspiration exhausts the United States, and also it prevents the US from adjusting to this multipolar realities. That is, it's getting bogged down in Europe when its priorities in a multipolar world should be to have more influence in the Western Hemisphere, and also they want to confront China in Asia. Not that this is necessarily a great idea, but at least Europe is no longer a priority. So this seems to be splitting the U.S., but also it seems to be where the Europeans get very uncomfortable, because there's not really a clear plan for Europe in the role after unipolarity, that is, after the United States deprioritizes and in Europe and partially leaves the continent. And I'm not sure if this is also the reason why we have this revival in German militarism. But given that this war began as a conflict over the European security architecture, with Ukraine being a symptom of this, to what extent do we need some settlement on what European security should look like? Because we're dealing with this as if it's only an issue about Ukraine, that this war doesn't really have that much to do with Ukraine as opposed to being one component, and also it doesn't really have that much to do with territory either. It doesn't seem like we're dealing with the root of the matter.
That's exactly right, and I think it's important to recognize that this U.S. gambit, the one that Brzezinski spelled out in 1997, was a piece of a larger puzzle. It was the global chessboard. It wasn't just a European issue. The belief in the 1990s in the United States was unipolarity, that there was one global hegemon, that was the United States, and that it was the role of the global hegemon to make sure that it would never be threatened by any pesky wannabes in the future. One part of that was to corner Russia, surrounded in the Black Sea region, basically render Russia a third-rate power or less. Brzezinski openly opined about Russia breaking into a number of weak separate units that would be joined together as some kind of confederacy, not even a federation, but some kind of confederacy of a European Russia, a Siberian Russia, and an Far East Russia. So they were dreaming that the U.S. would run the world, and this is one part of it. And the real dreamers, the delusionists, became known as the neocons. They thought that the U.S. would render Russia into, as I say, a third-rate power, or completely broken, that the U.S. would dominate the Middle East, and that was a big part of the project, especially a Zionist orientation, because the U.S. went to war repeatedly for the sake of Greater Israel, which is so weird and almost unimaginable, but it was part of the neoconservative playbook. And in East Asia, the truth is they didn't have a strategy for China because they're not very intelligent people. They couldn't look ahead, and they didn't see that China was going to rise as a major power. So if you go back to the late 1990s, China barely figures in any of the discussions. It's not like they were plotting what to do. China was a place that was going to assemble our toys and automotive components and electronics gears and phones and things like that. It wasn't a matter of geopolitical concern at the time. So this unipolar project had its European dimension in NATO enlargement. And this, of course, ran contrary to the fundamental alternative vision of European security, which was ostensibly the one that had ended the Cold War. Because remember that the end of the Cold War was German reunification in 1990, based on the 4+2 framework. And the goal of that settlement was indivisible security in Europe, that there would not be blocs. In fact, it was quite explicit of the US and Germany that NATO would not play any kind of strategic bloc role going forward. And the US said to Gorbachev, we will not take advantage of your unilateral ending of the Warsaw Pact military alliance or your economic and financial weakness as of the early 1990s, we will have indivisible security. And several treaties and agreements under the framework of the Organization of Security and Cooperation in Europe defined that kind of indivisible security. NATO was the opposite of that. NATO is bloc politics. The OSCE was the end of bloc politics. I was there in the Soviet Union in 1990 and in Russia from the end of 1991 onward, and I heard an earful from Gorbachev, from Yeltsin, and so forth about a common European home, indivisible security, the end of blocs, peace and cooperation. I believe it. I believed it then. I think that that's the answer to European security. The Europeans are not having it, by the way. This is so strange to my mind. They were offered peace, and they have basically rejected it. First, under the push of the United States, they said, yes, we prefer U.S. hegemony to a common European home. They made that choice. They had qualms and misgivings. Actually, the showdown came at the Bucharest NATO summit in 2008 when the U.S. said, now's the moment. We're going to push NATO to Ukraine and Georgia. Chancellor Merkel, President Hollande said, not a great idea. George Bush put his foot down and said, we're going to do it. And they said, okay, we're going to do it. That's when the U.S. hegemon dominated, and the idea of any kind of indivisible security disappeared entirely. So when you ask what is the security for Europe now, Europe needs a security arrangement not based on blocs. But Europe can't get its head around that. And by the way, Europe has made this mistake so many times. There's a kind of bloody mindedness in Europe. I'm just rereading the history of Poland refusing to form a common security agreement with the Soviet Union in 1939, even as Nazi Germany was about to destroy Poland. But Poland hated the Russians so much that it wouldn't even look to the Soviet Union for protection in 1939. If you look back at that, it's completely suicidal. And Europe is just a difficult place. Everybody hates each other. And so they can't imagine collective security. They can't imagine indivisible security. Now, what do I recommend for this? I recommend that the Europeans have direct diplomacy with Russia. I recommend, by the way, that you don't put European security literally in the hands of a few Baltic state politicians. This is to put Europe's politics into the hands of the most rabidly Russophobic people on the whole continent. But if Europe maintains its Russophobia, there is no security for Europe. And if Europe doesn't engage in diplomacy, there's no peace for Europe, whatever the United States does. So when you ask me what's the European security arrangement, it would be that Europeans understand Russia's not going anywhere. Russia is a part of Europe, and it has been geographically. It is a part of Europe, to the Urals at least, and militarily, culturally, diplomatically, geopolitically, financially, economically, it is. And if the Europeans think the United States is going to somehow make that not happen, well, that was the idea of the Cold War, but that's past. So if Europe is looking to the United States to replay the Cold War, forget it. The U.S. is tired. It's got huge budget deficits. Russia is not viewed as some, even it was wrongly viewed then, but it's not viewed as some global communist threat. The United States is just not interested in the European hatreds. And so they should talk to the Russians and figure out what their indivisible security really is about.